Another critique of mental imagery research, or maybe just an observation, is this picture metaphor. And forgive me just hitting a couple sentences here. Much of the discussion so far has suggested an analogy between picture and images in countless ways. So some psychologists speak casually of visual images as mental pictures. And what's the difference? Well, the question is, how far does the analogy go? This author, Pilishin, who was, as you can see, very active about 50 years ago, pointed out pictures and images differ in several ways. Perhaps the most important difference is that you can physically look at a picture without first knowing that it's a picture. So what if somebody wordlessly hands you a photograph and you say, "What's this?" Well, you cannot look at an image unless you first know what it is. So I can't form an image of something I've never encountered before. Maybe some piece off the space shuttle or something like that. I can't imagine that. So images are internal constructions formed with some intention in mind. You don't just spontaneously create them. They have to be a particular thing. It's kind of a good point, I guess you could say. So second, pictures and images are disrupted and disruptible in different ways. You can cut a photograph in half with the result that arbitrary parts of the objects depicted disappear. But images are organized in a different way. So let me pick up on that said. So basically the notion is that I can do things with a photograph that it can't be done with an image. I can manipulate it, cut it, and arbitrarily make things disappear. That's not so true with an image. And last, images are seen to be more easily distorted by the viewer's interpretation than pictures that tend to be static. So you might remember Bartlett's work on story recall. What people's memory for the stories change over time, and that often depends on their initial or subsequent interpretations. This is also the case with images. These authors presented participants such as those figured in 913, one of two labels. Participants' later reproductions of the patterns based on the imagery were distorted in accordance with the label provided. So here it is. This is figure 913. And you can see, here it goes. Carmichael, Hogan, and Walter presented participants with the patterns such as those in figure 913 with one of two labels. Their reproductions of the patterns based on the imagery were distorted in according with the label. So here goes. In this case, we could say, let me get rid of that passage there. There's the stimulus figure. I could describe it as curtains in a window or a diamond in a rectangle, with the second one down a bottle or a stirrup, a crescent moon, or the letter C, a beehive, or a hat, etc. And depending on the way I give people, the way I describe it, they reproduce it differently. So that suggestion is that in figure 913 is that participants' later reproduction of the pattern were distorted in accordance with the label. The label went a long way, and that's of course a fundamental difference between a photograph and an image. An image is more malleable in that way from the power of suggestion. A photograph is only physically malleable in cutting off corners, etc. It's a clever demonstration. It's amazing just the power of suggestion would affect how we draw things differently later and deviate from the original stimulus. So certainly that diamond in a rectangle is drawn differently than the curtains in a window, the bottle versus the stirrup, etc. People really depart from the original drawing depending on what they've heard. So kind of an interesting idea. Similarly, these authors showed that people make many errors when trying to reproduce their images of familiar objects. So try drawing a picture of a penny without looking at one and then compare it with a real penny. And if you really had to, and this is because pennies don't have much value, they're only worth 1 cent and you can't buy anything with 1 cent these days. Would you know which way Abe Lincoln is facing, which way In God We Trust is that on the front or the back, etc.? And the suggestion is we just don't have enough information, that the image has far less information than a photograph would. We simply don't have the quality of the image in our mind to reliably produce a sound image. So this idea here that we talk about mental pictures, but they're not the same thing. photographs and images that are actually physical can be physically trimmed or manipulated, etc. But images, the way we produce them, must rely on experience. I can't just imagine something that I've never heard of and have no concept of. And also, they're prone to power of suggestion, as we saw here. The power of suggestion, is this a bottle or a stirrup, is going to affect how I produce that later. It's a fairly clever idea. It's really something that is quite illustrative, or I guess you could say demonstrates the point really well, that depending on the suggestion I give people, it affects on how they render it. So anyway, images and pictures, or images and mental imagery, the idea of photographs and actual images are not completely correspondent. We do have some deviations there. And given that that's true, we can't say that photographs and images, or real life and images, are exactly the same thing, because images rely on internal construction and physical things can be physically manipulated.